Cool, fantastic. Well, welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. So my name is Jonny Peters and I'm Chief of Staff at E3G, which is an independent climate change think tank with a global outlook, as we like to say. And until recently, I led there on international trade. But I'm also joined by my colleague Emilie Kerstens, who still does work on international trade. And we're really pleased to be able to welcome you today to this roundtable. So E3G has been a champion of the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate since, well, before MC12 in 2022. At MC12, the trade ministers of Ecuador, the EU, Kenya and New Zealand first co-hosted an informal breakfast dialogue in Geneva on how trade and trade policies can support the Paris climate goals. And it's amazing to see just how far the coalition has come today. So here at MC13 now, hosting its second ministerial meeting, outgrowing the WTO's library room, to now host 61 members and issuing a communique, a menu of voluntary actions for trade and climate action, which we'll no doubt hear more about soon. But in that regard, I won't do sort of many introductions today, and I'll ask everyone to introduce themselves as we go around for the roundtable. But I will introduce two people. The first is Maria Martin-Pratt, who is Deputy Director General of the EU's DG Trade, responsible for ACP countries and sustainable development issues. The EU is, of course, one of the four co-conveners of the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate Initiative, so we're really pleased to have you here, Maria, again, to hear more about the state of play of the initiative, because you're so deeply involved. The second person I'd really like to introduce, who probably doesn't need any introduction, is Carolyn de Birkbeck, the founder and director of the TESS Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs, the thought leader behind the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate, and now host of the Coalition's Secretariat as well. So Carolyn, we're really pleased to have you here and hear from you second as we open up for the roundtable, so speaking after Maria. I won't speak for long, since we've got already some distinguished speakers here today, but also because you're going to hear a bit more from me later on at the reception after this. So also just to plug that we do have a reception event after this, also on the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate. So do come along to that later after this event. What I will do, though, is give a short bit of context about our event title today, so Non-State Climate Champions and the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate. I think basically the genesis for this was, so E3G has now hosted two big events on the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate at two successive public forums, and Maria, you joined us for the last one, so thank you again for that. And it was really interesting. So at the last event, just to give a plug, we also were plugging our own report on priorities for the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate. So I won't say anything about priorities. You can just look at that report if you're interested. But what was really interesting at that event was in the Q&A, it really kind of transpired that a lot of the both business and civil society that were there present at the event wanted to know how they could get more involved in the coalition, basically. And so we basically thought, in terms of our theme for this event here today, we can delve a little bit deeper into that if possible. So how can non-state actors support the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate and hopefully become champions of the initiative? We did also send 3 guiding questions around for the discussion today, which you can also sort of lean in on your remarks if you want to. And I'll just go through these again if you want to muse on them a bit further. So the first was, how can we manage some of the tensions related to trade and climate issues? How can we bridge silos between the trade and climate communities? And what do you think the next steps for the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate should be? And how can non-state actors champion this important initiative? So that's plenty from me, and I think some of the answers to some of those questions I hope will be the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate. But that's plenty from me now, and I'll hand over to Maria to say some opening remarks.
Thanks, Jonny, and thanks for having me. It's nice to cross the street and get out of our building, even if it's to get into another. And I should start by echoing what you just said. It's impressive how the Coalition of Trade Ministers for Climate have gone from an idea, a concept, into a reality. And I think we were all very impressed by the latest meeting and what it means in terms of demonstrating that you can go from a concept into putting in practice something that I think has a future in an area that is very much there to be developed. So there my thanks go obviously to the work that the team with Carolyn does, and my own team in Digi Trade, and in particular Indre, who I'm sure you all know very well, and that has put an enormous amount of dedication and very good work on this. Now, I think that the starting path, the starting point, when we started considering the idea of the coalition was, okay, we might have different pathways to reach climate objectives. I'm perfectly aware of the fact that sometimes those different paths lead to differences as well in terms of assessment and in some cases disagreements. But I also think, and I'm sure we all agree on that, that we have a very clear common goal. So in that respect, what the coalition tries to do is to make sure we can work together to strengthen global collaboration on trade, climate and environmental sustainability. And it's very impressive also because it brings together a very diverse group of ministers from all regions of the world and from different levels of development, from different levels of climate vulnerability. That makes the coalition rather a unique event for us. What has been done during the first year? In particular, what was one of the key objectives of the coalition, which was to break silos and to build bridges and partnerships between climate and finance communities and trade communities. And in that respect, to try to explore how best to foster climate action, the green transition, and climate resilient development on the ground. We did have the first ever dialogue between trade, finance, and climate ministers at the margins of the WEF. And that link that is not that often made, in my view, proved to be very useful in terms of exchange of ideas on how trade and finance can help deploy the technologies and the investments that are needed to achieve the climate mitigation and adaptation goals that we all have. So that is a dialogue that was needed, that we think continues to be needed going forward, so we want to maintain and make growth. There has also been an organization of several encounters with stakeholders. Lately, the meeting with the Alliance of the CEO Climate Leaders, where there was a lot of emphasis put on the need to keep supply chains open and to have a stable rollout of low carbon technologies. There were calls for more public-private partnerships, calls for more creation of positive incentives to decarbonize supply chains. All that was discussed, and that is also work that we need to take forward. And which I think was quite a symbolic moment, the meeting that took place during the 28th UN Climate Change Conference. So the fact that we had trade at the COP, that says a lot as to the path that has been walked, and their discussion between academia and stakeholders working on trade and climate was a very, very good occasion. Now, as you were saying, there are a number of very good ideas that have been distilled in the voluntary actions that you see reflected now, outlined in our roadmap for future work. What these actions aim to do is to strengthen the coalition efforts in breaking silos, again, between trade, climate, and finance communities. Second, promote trade-related climate actions in international organizations and in the WTO particularly. That's why we're here, or at least that's why you're here. Help developing and least developed countries put together trade and climate strategies. We have done it. Many other countries have done it, but many countries need to make sure they do it as well. Promote trade and investment in goods, services, and technology that help mitigate and adapt the climate change. That evolution from trade is bad for climate and environment towards trade is a tool for climate and environment is a fundamental one that we need to continue pushing. Advocating for international standard setting to help decarbonization efforts fundamental issue, a very complicated one, but one that I'm sure will require work as a priority, and again, engage with the private sector, including with small and medium-sized enterprises and micro-enterprises to encourage them as well to participate in what I think they all realize they need, which are sustainable, transparent, and resilient supply chains. Voilà, I think the meeting of the coalition, I don't know, because once you get into the tunnel of any ministerial conference, was it 2 days ago? 3 days ago. Which day is today? Anyways, this week or last week was a very, very important event that I think underlined as well the importance of making the WTO more responsible and more responsive to environmental challenges. Voilà, I stop there. I'm very glad to be here, mostly in a listening mode, to hear those that know what we're talking about, which is those of you around the table.
Amazing.
So
thank you so much. Well, thank you so much. Carolyn.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Jonny, and also for the background on the coalition. So I am here really with two hats on. One is as the director of TESS, but I will wear today the hat which is supporting the co-leads of the coalition as TESS hosts the secretariat of the coalition, which we're really delighted to do. We're super proud of the coalition and the work that it's doing. So what I think I could add is just a little bit of the context. So the first thing that I find exciting about the coalition is that it has a really quite extraordinary collaborative spirit behind it. I think you have 4 co-leads from very diverse contexts with different needs and priorities in this space, but a common vision of contributing to the global climate agenda. So with the EU, Ecuador, New Zealand and Kenya, they're really quite different players in the global system. And I get to have the privilege of watching them cooperate on a daily basis. So it's really a joint effort among the 4 co-leads, which I think is really impressive, and also very much a joint effort with the wider membership of the coalition. So I would say the meetings that we've had have a good vibe. You know, it's a positive environment when the ministers meet. It's a positive environment. There are differences of opinion, but there's really that sense of, I think, satisfaction that there's working towards trying to work out how to cooperate on this shared agenda. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing just to mention is the coalition has been growing since it was launched. The first meeting we had was in June 2022 alongside MC12. And there were around 25 ministers. Now, when we launched in January in Davos, there was 55, and since then we have 6 more members. And what's interesting is their diversity as well. So you have Papua New Guinea and Fiji, St. Vincent's from the Caribbean, we have Cameroon from Central Africa, and then just recently Morocco. So it's a really diverse, growing membership as well. The second thing that I think is just that I could add to this is that the launch statement of the coalition, which I think it's really worth going back to for those who haven't looked at it. It's in here, their launch statement. They spent a lot of time as a coalition crafting that and getting buy-in into that. So those who are joining the coalition are implicitly buying into this vision for the coalition. I think one thing that's interesting is that they focus on both climate change mitigation and adaptation, which is very important to many of the least developed countries, the climate vulnerable countries in the coalition. I think that's a shift in focus than just the decarbonisation goals that one tends to talk about more broadly. And there's also a focus on climate resilient development and sustainable development more broadly, so this nexus of trade, climate and sustainable development. And I think for the diverse members of the coalition, this is really important because they want to decarbonise and be part of that. They want to fulfil their NDCs and their commitments, but they also want to have pathways to sustainable development for their countries. So that's something that I think is an ongoing theme of the coalition. But I think the really good thing that it does is tries to begin to carve out a more positive narrative, both about the potential for trade to contribute to the response to the global climate crisis, but also that there's potential for governments to find more ways to cooperate on the trade and climate nexus, and to recognise that they need to find ways to do this. It's not easy. We all know that's not an easy thing, but it's a different discourse than one finds in a lot of the papers, which are really about all of the tensions, the geopolitical challenges to building cooperation around these topics. I think the recognition of the need to cooperate is something that we shouldn't underestimate as a powerful thing in and of itself. And so just that on the principles that they have in the launch statement, the first is about cooperation. The key thing here is including by engaging nationally and internationally with fellow ministers. So at the national level with trade, finance, climate and development ministries, and also internationally, which is, as Maria said, at COP28, taking the time to go out there and try and learn from and understand and respond to the global climate agenda. That's a new thing. And it's not easy for trade ministers to do that, because often back home the climate ministries are saying, well, this is our job. You know, what do you want to be doing our job? And so there's a lot of very fruitful discussions, I think, that have happened even in the process of countries joining the coalition, where they've had to go off and talk with their environment ministries and other ministries and think that through. The second principle is around inclusivity, which I've already mentioned, but they also talk about engagement with relevant stakeholders from different regions as well. The third principle is around leadership, and there's really this idea of high-level political direction. I don't think the ministers, as far as I have heard, envisage having lots of technical working groups or replicating and creating a big machinery, but the idea is to give them a space to have some high-level political interaction. And then the fourth is to try and principles around transparency, so they can build trust necessary to bolster international cooperation. So I will stop there. I would encourage you also to look at the menu of voluntary actions. There's a lot in there, actually. I don't think it's an exclusive list either. Some of the areas, they're examples of, you know, these are negotiated documents, so these are examples of things that many of the members were willing to have in the document. There are many others that subsets of the members will quite likely have liked to have seen in here and will be happy to work on collectively, but I think it's progress after just 1 year to have such a menu of voluntary actions and a communique that sent such a strong message for the importance of boosting cooperation on these issues at the WTO. And then just the final thing I would note is that the last priority of the coalition is around this building alliances and partnerships with the climate and finance communities and stakeholders. So that, I think, is what's really interesting to hear today from you here about what are some of the issues and priorities that you think will be important, how the stakeholder and expert community can support. The coalition does have some friends of the coalition. Some of them are here, colleagues from UNCTAD, our colleagues from UNEP and the WTO Secretariat, ITC, among others. So there are organizations who've indicated that they're willing to support the work. And so I think that's something we need to build on going forward.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, from both of you, I think we've had Carolyn just there, that founding context and taking us through the evolution, Maria taking us through as well the kind of founding principles, but also the outcome there at MC13, which is incredibly useful to hear to kick us off. But now, it's over to the rest of you. So we did tee up a few of you. We sent you the guiding questions in advance, so I'm hoping you've been thinking about them for ages and come with loads of great ideas about how you can go out and become champions yourselves of the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate Initiative. So the floor is now yours, everyone. So please just give hands and then I'll just sort of bring people in. So please don't be shy, otherwise I'll start talking absolute rubbish to fill time, which is the worst thing there. Or more rubbish than usual.
I think by hand.
Oh, hi. Yeah.
Hi, Jonny. I'm not sure whether it's the right moment, but just to introduce myself, Ho Lim from the WTO Secretariat, Director for Trade and Environment. I'm possibly here because I didn't drown Jonny or Ilaria at an ill-judged sailing trip some time ago. Because,
that will continue to be my best story ever as well.
Well, we'll talk about that.
Choppy waters of international trade.
But no, I mean, it's fantastic to be here and great to see the coalition at MC13. And our DG was happy to be able to provide some remarks at the meeting that was had. And just to reflect a bit, I mean, I'm not sure whether we're a non-state champion. I'm not sure exactly where we come in, but we certainly think that it's great to be having this sort of coalition. Certainly something on the minds of my DG for some time that would be useful to have trade ministers work on climate and talk about climate issues, but as well as with other ministers, of course. And you know, we were very happy that at COP28, the UAE invited us to help them to co-design Trade Day, and I think, as you was mentioned, that went very well. We worked on that together with UAE, but as well as with the other IOs, UNCTAD, ITC, ICC, and so forth. And we also had a trade house pavilion, which tried to put that focus on the range of issues that already been mentioned on this nexus between trade and climate, but also looking towards opportunities as well as recognizing tensions and the need for collaboration. But I think the other thing I just wanted to mention was that as the coalition thinks of its work and how it goes forward, there are already certain products that could be really helpful. I mean, of course, this is Secretariat products. WTO Secretariat provided at COP28 10 trade policy tools for climate action. They are based upon what governments have already been doing because they're mainly compiled through our environmental database, which is very trade nerd-like, if I can put it that way. But I think there's a sort of specificity that could be helpful because you have in there measures that speak to trade people, ranging from tariffs to non-tariff barriers to government procurement, standards and regulations and so forth. But at the same time, they've been put in the context of looking at how these trade policies can support better or more enhanced climate action, be it on mitigation and adaptation. So you've got something that can provide that type of specificity that I think would be really interesting if the coalition could bring this about, if you like. And I think it gels well with some of the voluntary actions that have been put forward already. And that's one possible way of thinking about this. And the trade policy tools themselves were designed so that governments can think about it in terms of how it can support their national determined contributions or national adaptation plans. So that's another new chapter to think about. I mean, how can these things be integrated more concretely into policy documents at a national level? The other thing, and just to highlight, is that we also had steel standards principles, which were brought together by standards bodies, as well as steel industry, plus IOs, spelling out a range of principles that could allow for greater alignment on carbon measurement and methodologies, but based upon trade principles. So that's another instrument. This is not a governmental pledge or anything, but it's standards bodies as such. But it's another tool to give a bit more specificity. And lastly, WTO Secretariat, together the World Bank and the World Economic Forum, have launched an initiative called Action for Climate and Trade, which is more capacity building, more technical assistance, but it's different from usual WTO technical assistance. This is much more working with national governments, those who are interested in doing so, that is, to better define how can trade or trade policy support their climate strategies. So let me stop there just to offer a few thoughts and to help break the ice.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you firstly for breaking the ice, but also I think, kudos to you for, in terms of giving us this surrounding context, kudos for you in terms of the work that you've done to take the WTO out of its classical spaces, and particularly I think hats off for COP28 as well, because that is a big old undertaking, not just from a logistical standpoint, but for all of that good policy leadership as well is really well received. So useful extra context there. We've had lots of context, but what we're really interested in are points from you. Please, yeah.
No, that's first.
So I was just going to say, so I'm Penny Naas. I'm here representing a group called TradeExperettes, which is a group of about 600 female trade experts from around the world. And so this year we did 10 quick wins on trade and the environment. We outlined kind of 10 concrete ideas that we thought where trade could contribute. It probably supports the document that the WTO put out. I think that one of the things that we struggle with sometimes, and maybe I just get locked into it because I'm in Washington, and it came up in a conference that Dan was at, that Jennifer Hillman and others hosted in Washington, D.C., that there's also this real intersection with industrial policy, particularly amongst a few countries that conflict with climate goals. And so that creates some tensions, but opportunities as well. So one of the ideas that we had was, how to get the environmental goods and services agreements back up
and running. And given that the organization of the Trade Ministers for Climate looks a lot like a JSI organization, there might be an interesting play there to move forward with some subsets of some of these things that in the past we attempted at the multilateral level but couldn't quite get over the line. And so maybe there are opportunities if we continue to break the JSI Article 4 issues. There may be some opportunities there where we could find and encourage the diffusion of some of the technologies and the goods, and using trade to help facilitate and do that as a concrete opportunity that may exist.
That's great, really helpful. Thank you for breaking the ice as well. That's great. What I'll do is I'll collect a few bits, and then I might offer an opportunity for others who are more kind of deeply involved with the coalition to also come back and maybe reflect on some of the points as well. So we won't take them all in turn, but we'll gather reflections and then maybe respond to some of the points. So Asad, I saw you put your hand up before. Can I call on you next?
Thank you so much. So my name is Asad Naqvi. I'm head of the Economic and Trade Team in United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, based in Geneva. We'll start with congratulating the coalition. I was just listening to how much you have achieved and done in the first year of launching the coalition. I was part of the Finance Ministers Coalition when it was established. And I must say that you have done a lot more in the first year than
that's
it.
Not that it's a competition, right?
No competition. It is a competition.
It's not a race, but we're faster.
So well done, and deeply appreciated. Number two, I think that this coalition has put its priorities really well, I would say. The principle of looking at coherence and collaboration between ministries, I think that's the policy coherence debate, which has been there for many years, but nobody has picked it up. So thank you so much for putting that in the center of your agenda. And that's where, from the UNEP side, we will be very honored to support you. You all know that there is a UN Environment Assembly happening at the same time in Nairobi, which is looking at some of the issues that we are discussing here. And in future, I believe that there will be more channels of communication between the two bodies, and the meetings will not happen at the same time, so we can all join different ones. But coming from the UNEP side, so we have been advocating and humbly supporting this policy coherence agenda through a partnership which we call the Partnership for Action on Green Economy. We believe that it's not only about finance and environment agenda, it's about poverty agenda, it's about jobs agenda, it's about wealth creation opportunities of the poor agenda that has to come together. So it's 5 UN agencies. We host, UNEP hosts the secretariat. The other 4 agencies are UNDP, ILO, UNIDO, and UNITAR, which is the training and capacity building arm. And we try to take this agenda to the national level, where we try to bring the 5 ministries together on the sustainability agenda and define an economic and trade pathway towards economic growth. So we have a set of tools, and I will not go into the details, including macroeconomic and trade and industry assessment type tool. But basically, unless all of us come together, the policymakers don't find a full picture and ability to take a decision. They have to take a decision based on the reality which is in front of them. So in number 2, we have convincing science and convincing economics on sustainability. The political advocacy is the part which I think we need to focus more on, and that's where if we all come together and the 5 ministries come together, that becomes a bit easier. Financing was another missing element that we think, so we do a lot of work on public finance, including on how the budget could look probably more sustainable, so we call it sustainable budgeting approach, which we developed a tool together with Oxford University, but also on fiscal reforms, subsidies, taxations, price incentives, etc., that then feed into a national economic and development plan, and then possibly on the budgeting and allocations. The other part on the financing is the private finance. Many of you may have heard about UNEP Finance Initiative, which is an initiative together with many banks, investment companies, insurance companies, and we have just launched a net zero export credit facility to help finance the green trade. that is a work that has just started at COP28, and we would like all of you to join and help and lead it, because unless the finance is there, the greening of trade will remain a challenge for all of us. So in a nutshell, we are here to support you with three parts of a package, which is around policy support and policy development support at the country level, at regional and global level, and capacity building support, because just policy is never enough. You need to have the capacity to implement it, and then financing both from public and private side. And we are an email away, we are a call away, we are a WhatsApp away as we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asad, and thank you for plugging the Net Zero Export Credit Agencies Alliance. As an aside, there's a massive pet project of mine because I was involved in the campaign to get UK Export Finance to stop financing fossil fuels. That precipitated a lot of this stuff and has culminated in a lot of this good work. And a lot of other countries are doing the same, a lot of the countries that are in the coalition as well. So big endorsement personally from me of that good work as well. That's great. So I had a hand from Markus, and I'm sorry I don't know your name, but I can... Thank you, and I can remedy that by saying you have a great suit. So, really a great suit for Markus.
Thank you very much. So Markus Gehring, University of Cambridge, and CISDL. We've been doing a bit of research on comparing NDCs of trade partners, and then comparing the underlying trading relationships. And I think this initiative is such a great example of countries really coming together. What could perhaps be stronger is then linking back to the Paris Agreement mechanism, right? So it's not just for the Paris Agreement that you adopt an NDC, it's actually your declaration to the world what you want to focus on going forward. And I think some of the member states have done a fantastic job really integrating their WTO membership, their openness to international trade into their NDCs, and then let the NDC in turn inform their trade priorities and how they act at the global stage. And so from a think tank academic point of view, this is exactly the right approach. And I just wish more countries were taking their NDCs under the Paris Agreement much more seriously going forward.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So Mayra Souza from IFF, International Flavors and Fragrance, private sector. So I think it's great indeed, I totally agree, the effort that is being made for coherence, the dialogue at the WTO level, the coalition, and COP28. So we hear a lot about COP28. In terms of near future, what are the ambitions for COP29? What are we thinking in terms of reaching potential commitment? So that would be my question.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, and it was really good to see a presence and activity at COP29 referenced in the Coalition of Trade Ministers communique, so that was really positive. So there's lots in there I'm sure others will want to kind of unpack. Unless we've got... Yeah, please.
Yeah, apologies for my boring suit. It's not as nice as the previous speaker.
I should make MC14 the no more boring suits.
I would also like to echo previous speakers in congratulating the co-conveners of the coalition as well as everyone that's supporting. And also, like a good student, sticking to some of the talking points that you had really kindly provided us with. On the breaking the silos point, I think something that would really help is having more conversations at the ministerial level, like was organized thanks to the EU at Davos with climate, trade, finance, environment, finance and trade ministers, perhaps also bringing in development ministers, because in many countries I think that becomes a sore point down the road. And the other thing is not letting the perfect be the enemy of perfectly good. So try and create a parking lot for points of disagreement. When we start breaking down silos, it is not necessary that we'll all see eye to eye immediately. But why let that defer many substantial points of agreement that we might have? Like was pointed out by a speaker, that there is a common goal. We all agree on that. Specifics might differ, but let that not deter us from what we're doing. And then quickly on the point on where non-state actors can add value, I think political opportunities is something that could be of great impact. The coalition works really well as a leadership entity, and this can be making statements and setting expectations ahead of public moments. The example was given by a speaker on the meeting at Davos with the Alliance for CEO Climate Leaders. For context, this is an alliance of more than 100 CEOs of global companies that have committed to decarbonization by 2050, either by procurement of net zero technologies or by investing in those technologies, and also carbon capture. But these kind of interactions with non-state groups set expectation for business, which is really important to then kind of signal the commitment at a political level as well.
We might introduce yourself.
Sorry.
Introduce yourself.
Jeet, World Economic Forum.
World Economic Forum, there we are. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, please.
And I'm Julia Kurt. I'm the president of Organization Women International Trade. It's a non-profit organization, and this is great that we have non-state champions here for, how shall we say, beating the climate change that we have. The women are much more impacted than actually that we think, specifically women-led businesses, because there is lack of finance, lack of access, lack of shelter, whatever happens, women-led businesses are more impacted. And with that, I would really like to go to grassroots, because it's great to have non-state, but we shall, like breaking the silos, not forget to actually go to the front line to see the reality. What is it? How is it impacting the people in any kind of circumstances, specifically women? And I think that shall be not forgotten, because this is always what happens. I mean, we know WTO, it's great, World Trade Organization. We have got as well partnerships with ITC, She Trades, UN Women, because we are Organization Women International Trade. However, what I always hear and what the feedback comes to me, or I call feed forward always, is that we always forget what's happening in the ground. You know, even in all these areas like Kenya, even in rural areas, connectivity issues, whatever it is, we shall not forget to go to the grassroots to understand better what are the exact needs when we are creating policies, when we need to create some structure. And I think this is really important to always go back. We are happy to collaborate, of course. We are non-profit. It's all volunteer organization things. But to give you a lens of how women are impacted, specifically women, but we also incorporate humans. That's my kind of pledge to actually say, please don't forget the grassroots.
Thank you. That's great. That's really great. Maybe while people are gathering further thoughts, reflections, we could turn back to some of our introductory speakers who could maybe give some reflections on some of the things they've heard. If you don't mind, don't have to as well.
You go first.
Yeah, no, there was a question as to what's happening next between now and the next COP that I thought was very interesting. And I see people having to. Look, I can provide some more of a general context, but I find it very interesting. Just to give you a little bit, how enormous the change is. Here I am working in the Director General of the European Commission that deals with trade. The shift we have seen over the years, including by the injection of trade and sustainable development in all of the actions we take, including in our FTAs. We didn't have much of a policy not that long ago. We have at the moment 2 full departments, okay, not as big as we would want them, but they are working on trade and sustainable development, including climate, including environment. And what I see in the work we do is what comes back all the time is you need to break silos. You need to break silos. Actually, there is no choice but the need to break silos. We are seeing it now. I see after a number of years where at European level we've been deploying a very active agenda in terms of climate and environment, it has just gone into all of the policies that you were referring to. And indeed, you cannot forget the economic side. You cannot forget that you need to bring people in and say, look, this is good for your development. You need to continue being able to make a living or start making a living. These green policies are not bad for you, are not taking you away from opportunities, but rather the opposite. But it's not that easy a message, and anyone that has looked at what's happening in the streets of many of our European cities at the moment with farmers understands that. Why am I going there is because it makes a lot of sense to lift it at ministerial level and also to have ministers that are often dealing with different departments speaking to each other and speaking with others in other countries. So that is why I think remains what is unique in the work you're doing and why I think it does have a purpose that should be maintained and grow going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, may I add just a few things? So just one of the things that I thought to bear in mind is I think it's sort of important to see the coalition's outputs as cumulative over time. I mean, it's the first year of work, so there's been a launch statement that was already something significant. This communique for aligning really from its ministerial meeting, but also for MC13 and the menu of voluntary actions. But there are other things that have been published. So in January, the 4 co-leads published an op-ed on the nexus of trade, climate and finance alongside Davos, which was really, I think, quite a forward-looking piece from a group of trade ministers. It was open to other members of the coalition to sponsor. In the end, it was co-authored by 10 ministers, but I think it would easily have been co-sponsored by almost all. There was just a time crunch in getting that out. So I would see that as something that reflects the will of the coalition more broadly and encourage you to go and look at that piece as well. The thing I was just thinking is, my dream is, as someone supporting the co-leads in their work, is that we hear more from stakeholders and experts on concrete ideas of pragmatic things that governments could take forward and start doing. And this applies equally for the work at the WTO that our colleagues, Ho and others are leading there in the CTE and in the member-led initiatives. But we need more work from the national level where stakeholders and experts are talking to their national governments about what they could do and what they could take forward. Because that's where they need to hear that nationally. We can't just generate it at the international level. So for those of you who have contacts regionally or nationally, I think that's really critically important that we build that conversation. That's from the most developed to the least developed countries. It's not only a capacity building challenge for the least well-resourced countries. And you see in the statement that there's an indication of sectoral issues that they're interested in, from green hydrogen to natural disaster recovery, sustainable food systems, renewable energy. There's a lot in there. And so the question is how can we, and here I think in the statement it focused more on the sectors or M's that they were interested in than the policy tools, partly because that was just easier to get started on. But we need a lot more work on concrete examples, and I think what would be useful is to think of who's in the coalition and who could we have working in partnership within the coalition and who can they partner with within their region. So that we use their leadership capacity, because they're not going to, as I said, probably generate a whole lot of working groups and so on, but they have the capacity to lead. And I think the third thing that would be useful from the stakeholder and expert community is to hold, if I may, sort of hold the ministers to account for the fact that they joined this coalition and they signed up for these principles and these priorities, and say, well, if you're meeting bilaterally on trade issues or regionally, then look up who are your climate coalition colleagues who are there and have a conversation about cooperation on trade and climate, and have that politically on the agenda. If that's something, we won't get to the specifics unless we have that leadership. So I think that's something that we really need from stakeholders, and things like Asad, you mentioned the Net Zero Export Alliance. That's stuff that several members of the coalition are part of, and we can use the ministerial meetings as a way perhaps to shine spotlight on some of the good things that are happening and encouraging them to collaborate with each other more and seize these opportunities to move forward. But anyway, so that's hopefully a useful reflection on,
really helpful.
and hopefully not going beyond. Oh, one last thing is I do think that the co-leads intend to be at COP29 in there would be a presence of the coalition, and I think this year one of the challenges also is to have a trade presence, as our folks at WTO and UNCTAD and so on have so brilliantly done for COP28, but also make sure that trade goes to the other pavilions, if you see what I mean, so that we find a way in the agriculture discussions or in the energy discussions and so on that trade is present there as well as present in its own right, if that makes sense. And I know that's probably on your agenda anyway, but that's something that I was thinking about in the lead up to COP29. But
That's fantastic.
yeah,
Thank you.
maybe we should ask Indre, because I'm now speaking on her behalf, really.
I also have Maria here, but I think it's not only about attendance in the COP or being in the COP. It's about the message that the coalition can send in the COP.
Yes.
And this is what we try to do here in MC13 by issuing the communiqué, calling for a stronger commitment by all the WTO members to tackle environmental challenges, the climate change, but also others, including related ones like fisheries negotiations. So I think this is important because it's a political leadership group. So I think this is also what we are thinking about the COP29. Okay, so what is the message that the coalition is going to be able to send in the COP29? And I think this is where we are going to go and look forwards to in the next months to come. Work also with the coalition members, the new members as well that we have gained. So I think it is important. It's not only about attendance, but it's also what type of message do we want to send to the climate community about how trade can contribute to solving some of these challenges. And both Maria and Carolyn referred to, and I think Jonny, you as well, the positive message, the positive signal in terms of how this group of countries can work together and show that trade is not always the villain, but trade can also positively contribute to tackling some of these challenges. So I think this is an important message to send in the COP. And of course, WTO Secretary G is also doing a great job, and all of you. I know that we've organized, with help of Carolyn and in Ecuadorian Pavilion, a discussion with stakeholders to see a little bit what can be done. So I think this is very important to continue these dialogues going in the future.
Absolutely, that's great. Thank you. So I've seen a hand far corner, closer, and Dan next to me as well.
Dan, was that before me?
No,
No?
you're ahead.
Yeah, okay. So three things, I guess. One is that we could contribute at UNCTAD, and you get our full support. But just concrete example, it seems to me that there's a lot of these discussions at this level, and so it's very abstract. I think we need to start going to the nitty-gritty, the data and the modeling, and at the national level, as Carolyn mentioned. And one of the things we've started to do is the synergies and trade-offs between climate and SDG policies. And so if there's synergies, it's great. If there's trade-off, then one of the ideas, we could bring that to the Coalition of Trade and Climate Ministers and say, okay, there's a trade-off here. How do we address this, right? So co-creating solution when there is actually a trade-off between the socioeconomic and the SDGs, the other two dimensions of SDGs. The second one is we're mapping trade-related measures. I mean, as you know, the UN is developing the template 2.0 for the LDCs, and we're going to contribute to the trade-related, investment-related measures. So again, what's missing now is trust, as you mentioned. One way to build trust is if we ensure that once developing countries, especially all countries, but especially developing countries and those fiscally constrained, if once they put a 1.5 degree aligned NDCs forward in 2025, that they're guaranteed that the international community will be supportive. And so how do we ensure that, could you have talk, and could all of us have talk about, instead of keeping on having our discussion about, mutually agreed transfer of technology on agreed terms, could we sit down and actually design what that means? And developing countries should not have to negotiate one by one with an international to get the technologies. Maybe it's a three-tier system, depending on level of development. So again, these are concrete ways that we could ensure we build trust and find solution to these things. And finally, as we did at COP28, and as we work closely with HICO, if there is any need for a non-negotiating discussion, I'm that happy to host you if you feel that you need to pre-cook something before you go down the hill, roll down and bring it, so that you kind of have a more comfort level. Because we heard at the previous discussion that the LAC country yesterday were concerned about the discussion, and we heard that perhaps it's because they're afraid of where these discussions might go. they're not controlled. So perhaps some of these discussions need to be pre-held. And finally, when I was at the NAFTA, one of the things that we did is because somebody mentioned the stakeholders, the citizen submission. Why don't we ask citizens and you know, academia and everybody else to just, and we were talking with Markus about that right before. You know, we did that North American Trade and Environment Symposium. Why don't we have something similar where we call on civil society, everybody that has solution, to bring them forward, and then we compile them as to, you know, you have your 10, you have your 10. Let's bring the top 20, 50 of civil society from around the world solution to trade and climate.
Okay, thank you. Loads in there. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Fred Stoll from World Resource Institute, and I'm a bit of an intruder because I come from the environment and climate work, and we have the same kind of discussions you have here, but with none of you. Well, so my plea and what Carolyn just say is like, and also what you said, like, I come from the DC area, so from the acronyms WWF, EDF, CI, we all have these discussions, and so we need to link them, because I'm very happy on the coalition of trade, because we talk to the environment and climate ministers, or for EU it is INPA, ENF and CLIM, but we never talk with trade. And so, which is great, because you do have that link, and we all know how trade is important. But I get a bit scared, it's like, oh, we are having messages for COP, it's like, well, have you talked to the climate and environmental people, because they also develop messages for COP. It's great to hear that you have this relation now with trade, because we don't have that. In general, so I'm very happy to hear this all, and I hope we can link that. We can link the old-time climate environmental people who never got into the trade with you guys who have that link to trade, all working towards, you know, improved climate. So I'm very happy to hear it. A little bit. And there's also no problem with some overlap, because that's fine. We all have our different constituents and groups, but as long as we push all in the same direction.
Thank you, Fred. Maybe overlaps are exactly the point. Not a problem.
There's no problem with some overlap, as long as you push to the right direction.
Exactly.
And that's my only point. I heard, like, Web says 2050. Any company who says we're going to 2050, they say stop here. We don't talk to you. Then our climate is already over. So we, SPTI, SPTN, TESS protocol, NDC partnerships, that's not where we're going. We are way past that already with climate. So we have much sharper messages already, and so let's try to, and again, we have different partners, but trying to make sure that we are a little bit aligned on those.
Yeah, raising ambition is important.
So I thought the Sunday morning, and I think that was what Maria was groping for when we were trying to figure out when this was, GATT launch was an extraordinary event in terms of the energy in the room, the wide diversity of participants in the room, the positive spirit. I thought it was truly outstanding and provides a great base to build on. And I also think COP28, as Ho mentioned, was pretty extraordinary, as we began to see, you know, from my point of view, the big story of COP28 was the global stocktake, which suggested that we're seeing emissions still rise, not come down. And as a result, the real question was, what next? And I think trade did emerge as a critical point of policy leverage. The fact there was a trade house, a trade pavilion, and as a result, 55 discussions across 2 weeks about how trade could come to be brought to bear as part of the climate change solution. A dynamic WTO team led by a director general who's deeply committed to that mission of trade being part of the solution. And I think the fact, credit to the UAE, that there was a trade day, a thematic day for the first time in 30 years of these negotiations, where it put a sharp focus on the trade climate change opportunity. I think that what's interesting is that the conversation here presents the other side of the coin to some extent, that there's some tensions that do need to be addressed. And I do think you've heard now in several different ways the importance of getting into the depth and detail, or I guess it was the nitty-gritty, as we heard from Chantaline, which is right. And I do think that represents something of a challenge. For those of you who knew me at the WTO over the last 2 years, trying to help Ho out, I'm now back out of my 2-year secondment at the WTO and in my professorial role at Yale, working with the Remaking Trade project. And I would just say that our phase 2, having developed with this network of academics and policymakers outside the WTO a comprehensive trade system reform agenda, the so-called VLAR, Framework for a Sustainable Trade System. Our project is now focused on taking that out across the world with a series of regional workshops, thinking about the trade system reform agenda. And what we found is there's a lot of people who actually haven't gotten very deep into that. So there's a real need, and I hope we can partner with the coalition on this, a real need to help people get their mind around the concepts, the ideas, the challenges, the opportunities. And frankly, you heard, again, some of this, the need to help people get to it on their own terms. What's it going to be about for them? Second thing we're going to try to do is really take on board more feedback, understand where we don't have the story quite right, how to refine it. Chantaline reminds me every time we do conversations together that there's a developing country story that's still not fully understood or developed and needs to be brought in. And frankly, then thinking, and this is, I think, again, a point of significant convergence in terms of our efforts in the coalitions, what is the political path forward? Who are the champions? That could be countries, it could be organizations, it could be individuals, and how do we move this agenda? So I do think there's big opportunities. And I think, as several people have said already, one wants to recognize the diversity of approaches and priorities of countries and not run from that, but rather step into it and get people to really talk in a thoughtful, careful, serious way. And again, I hope our regional workshops we're going to do might provide a place for the coalition to come and help shape the conversation and really, to the extent we do have a very significant common agenda, pull together to deliver a better picture a year and 2 years from now.
That's absolutely brilliant. That join up sounds absolutely brilliant. So thank you, Dan. We are getting into the last few minutes, and I know everyone is desperate for a glass of wine. So I've had, I think, Markus and Ho catch my.
Let Markus go first.
I think we might need to start wrapping up after that. So Markus,
just a footnote. The college that I work at in the University of Cambridge also runs an initiative called Chapter Zero, so working with non-executive directors, and there might be another level of synergy that could be explored. They now have chapters in 70 countries. That's a really good constituency for the trade and climate ministers to maybe tap into.
Intervention at the board level, really good, really good.
Yeah, hi Johnny. I was a bit hesitant whether to say this or not because, I'm in the WTO Secretariat and WTO Secretariat are trained not to have any views. But, but anyway,
they are watching you here.
And they're watching us, and this on top of it is recorded. I mean, but in the interest of trying to sort of think a way forward, probably stating the obvious. The litmus test for many people outside of this room and the world at large is what happens across the road in the ministerial conference.
Yeah.
And they'll be watching what comes out of the ministerial outcome document is one thing, and also fishery subsidies negotiations. So my point is a very basic one, is that I think if the coalition is able to bring about that, whether you call it coordination, political muscle, or joined up thinking, that's the real test case right now anyway, is that how to help those negotiations across the road, and that's where you, all non-state actors, could also play a very significant role.
Yeah.
To do everything that you've all said here, that if there is a shift towards trade for climate or trade for environment, if we're now in the new environmental sustainability paradigm, how does that move the negotiations across the road? It's not an easy ask, but that's the reality. And I cannot reveal too much, but I can say that the negotiations are tough. You just have to follow what happened in Geneva leading up to here, and you realize that the one paragraph that they're discussing, it still remains what it is, under square brackets. So let me just leave it there.
Yeah, maybe I try and say what you can't say, which is the draft ministerial outcome document at the WTO level that I first saw didn't mention climate change. The coalition of trade ministers on climate have intervened to say it should mention climate change. Let's see if the final WTO document mentions climate change.
Can I ask just really quick question? So we're talking kind of about how trade can help climate. But is this group going to look at also how the climate is changing trade? In that, the Panama Canal and where infrastructure is today is not where it's going to need to be when the climate is changing. Is that something that this group is going to look at? Because I don't see people talking about how the fact that ports and jet streams are going to be changing, and that's really going to have an enormous impact on some of this stuff as well.
I think it's a very good point. We are looking more, what can trade do to support climate change? I think the coalition, what we try to say, is really about this, can we try to identify the positive elements here? I'm sure there is plenty of other work and where we can probably join our work together with the people in the climate community saying, okay, so how is climate impacting the trade regime? And at least I know internally in the EU we are looking at the two sides of the coin. Yeah. So I think this is something that we can also see if there is interest among the membership.
I would say that some of the smaller and more climate vulnerable countries, they talk about this regularly in their statements because they talk about the impacts of the climate crisis on their trade and on their ports, their infrastructure, their productive capacity, participation in supply chains. They're very articulate on that. It hasn't been into a broader discussion about the kinds of things you said on shipping channels, so that's will be interesting to reflect upon. But I do think to the extent also that the smaller and vulnerable countries in the coalition are very much focused on issues related to adaptation and resilience in the face of a changing environment already, if you see what I mean. So I think that would be something but it's not, it hasn't been a central issue so far, but it's been going for a year. So I think these are things that we need to look out for.
Thank you. I'm going to have to call time there because we are over time. Just lastly, just thank you to all of you for attending and for becoming champions of the Coalition of Trade Ministers and Climate Initiative. And thank you to our speakers, and do send my thanks to Maria. I know this is the problem of having negotiators around the table. They have to sometimes run off and negotiate things. But thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.